I'd spent 5 years in this company. 5 years of quiet dedication, of building things no one saw, of making sure systems ran like clockwork while everyone else took the credit. But no one ever said the tech world was about getting noticed. It was about survival. And I'd survived. Until Sarah Davis decided to throw me under the bus. I remember that day like it was yesterday, bright, sharp. The kind of day where you can feel the pressure in the air. I was in the middle of debugging a product update routine stuff. Or so I thought. The whole team had been pushing ourselves to meet an aggressive deadline. Stress was high, but that was nothing new. I had my headphones in. The world felt a little distant. And the only thing that mattered was the code in front of me. Then came the ping from Sarah. "Michael, we need to talk. Urgently." Now, I don't know what I was expecting, but it sure wasn't the tidal wave that followed. By the time I reached the conference room, the team was already there, along with a few execs, all standing around, eyes glued to Sarah. She was speaking in that measured, authoritative tone that she'd perfected over the years. You know the tone that makes everyone believe that whatever she's saying is not just a fact, but the fact. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, glancing over at me. "It's come to my attention that the software update we're launching today has major stability issues. Michael's team has failed to meet the basic requirements of the product. And as you all know, this product is critical for our expansion into the European market." The days following that meeting felt like a slow descent. Everyone had their eyes on me now. The buzz was palpable whispers in the hallways, questions about the product stability, and all of it turning into one massive, slow-motion crash. But the worst part wasn't the public disgrace. No, it was the realization that Sarah hadn't just undermined me, she'd set in motion a chain of events that could destroy the product and my reputation, and she was doing it without breaking a sweat. What Sarah didn't know was that I had already planted the seeds for her downfall. While everyone was busy staring at the fire Sarah had started, I was looking at the blueprints for the bigger explosion. I'd spent 5 years here. I knew the systems inside out, the loopholes, the weaknesses. More importantly, I knew how to manipulate them from the shadows. First things first, the software logs. When Sarah tried to claim that the product had major stability issues, I knew it wasn't just about the code. It was about the timing of the failure. If I could prove that the errors were only appearing after her team started pushing for the expedited launch, it would show not only incompetence on her part, but a clear case of her putting ambition before product integrity. I had the technical know-how to prove it. All I had to do was get my hands on the right data. So, I made a few calls. Nothing big, nothing obvious. I didn't need to raise suspicion, just a few well-placed whispers to the IT department, a quick chat with the right engineers who owed me favors, and the logs were mine. Over the next 48 hours, I pored over the data, combing through it like a surgeon searching for the tiniest anomaly. And there it was. In the middle of her push to accelerate the launch, a critical change was made to the product's deployment schedule. It wasn't a technical necessity. It wasn't even a good idea. But it was a decision that could be traced back to Sarah's marketing department. The instability was a direct result of her team's demand to shorten testing timelines. It was no accident. It was sabotage. I compiled my evidence. Detailed logs, email chains, changes to the product schedule, everything. I was sitting on a weapon. A quiet one. But a weapon nonetheless. Next, I turned my attention to the board of directors. Sarah had positioned herself as the golden child, the marketing mastermind who knew how to secure the company's future. But I knew something she didn't. The board was getting nervous. In the last few days, they'd been whispering about the product's delays, the press picking up on its failure, and their own lack of understanding of the situation. So, I started a quiet campaign. Nothing obvious. A few well-timed conversations with key figures, getting them to question the timing of the product launch, suggesting they might need a second opinion on the stability of the product. I made sure they knew who to ask. Me. Slowly, over the course of the week, the whispers grew louder. The product was doomed. If the launch went ahead, it would be a disaster for the company. And then, just as things began to build, Sarah made a bold move. She scheduled a high-profile meeting with the CEO and the board to address the crisis and present a solution to salvage the launch. The meeting was scheduled for Friday, just 2 days away. It was her last play to secure control. I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I knew she'd be preparing her case with all the data she had at her disposal. What she didn't know was that I had already gotten to the board members, planting the seeds of doubt. I wasn't going to just expose her mistakes. I was going to make sure the board saw her as the instigator of this whole mess. The last thing they'd expect was for her to be the one who caused it all. I spent the night gathering every piece of evidence I could. At this point, it was more than just the software logs. I had everything. The emails, the decision-making processes, the data analysis, and, crucially, the timeline of her team's actions. I was going to hit them with it all, but there was one last thing I needed to ensure before the meeting. Sarah wasn't stupid. She would have her own arsenal, her own carefully curated version of events. She'd likely have everything locked down with PR spin and false reassurances. I had to beat her to the punch. The final step was deceptively simple. I needed a leak. It wasn't going to be direct. I wasn't going to send an anonymous tip to the press or anything so obvious. No. I needed something subtle, a little whisper to the right journalist, the kind that would catch their attention but wouldn't seem too insidery, just enough to make them question the timeline of the product launch, make them see that something wasn't right. I made one phone call, and 2 hours later, the story hit the wire. Tech company faces criticism over risky product launch. Sources suggest internal conflict between marketing and engineering teams, was the headline. The article didn't name Sarah directly, but it was clear who the marketing-driven decision-makers were. And, more importantly, it questioned the integrity of the product's development cycle. By the time the board meeting rolled around, the narrative had already begun to shift. The clock was ticking. Sarah had no idea what was coming. A countdown to the meeting. Her final, desperate attempt to control the narrative begins. The words hit me like a slap to the face, but I held my ground. I hadn't seen any instability. The tests had passed, and the bugs were minimal. Nothing that couldn't be fixed in a few hours. But Sarah wasn't interested in the truth. She wasn't interested in details. She had a narrative to push, and I was the convenient scapegoat. She continued, her voice like polished stone. If we launch with this product as it is, it will damage our reputation and set us back months in the competitive race. We cannot afford failure. I'm recommending that we delay the launch until the issues are fixed. I looked around the room, at the faces of the executives. I could see the doubt forming, the way they shifted uncomfortably. No one wanted to be the one to challenge Sarah. No one wanted to risk their own careers by questioning the marketing director, especially with the looming product deadline hanging over us like a guillotine. And no one had the technical expertise to understand what was really going on except me. But of course, they weren't looking at me. They were looking at her. And that's when I realized something. Sarah wasn't just trying to save face. She was setting herself up for a different kind of victory. Her words weren't about fixing the product, they were about securing a competitive edge in the market. If the launch failed, it would be pinned on me. But if she managed to save the launch, if she managed to push it through despite the issues, she'd be the hero. She'd get the credit. And I'd be the fall guy. The humiliation wasn't just in the words. It was in the look of quiet judgment from the executives. In their eyes, I'd become the problem. The scapegoat. And I could see it now. Sarah wasn't just playing to win. She was playing to destroy me. Her plan was clear. Launch an unstable product, claim victory when it miraculously works, and leave me holding the broken pieces. She had everything to gain, and nothing to lose. Except for one thing. I wasn't the idiot she thought I was. I could feel the heat of the conference room closing in on me, the silence pressing in as the tension grew. They were waiting for me to speak, for me to admit my failure. But I didn't say a word. Instead, I turned to the boardroom's massive whiteboard, which was filled with numbers, metrics, and lines of code, a perfect representation of the chaos Sarah was trying to disguise. I've reviewed the data, I said, calm and collected, and as of the last deployment, all known issues have been resolved. What you're seeing here, I pointed to the board, are glitches in the simulation environment, not the live product. I could see the executives twitching, unsure whether to back me up or let Sarah continue her narrative. But Sarah didn't even flinch. She had already calculated that this moment was mine to lose. Michael, that's a good explanation, she said, too sweetly. But the system's still failing in critical areas. Perhaps we should consider pausing the launch, just to be safe. We can always push it back by a week or two. She was good. No, better than good. She was so far ahead in her little game. I almost admired her. But there was one thing she hadn't accounted for. The one thing that gave me a quiet, deadly advantage. She didn't know what I knew. And right now, I wasn't just a software engineer anymore. I was the one with the power to bring this whole thing crashing down. I could have fought back in the moment, could have told everyone the truth, but that wouldn't have been enough. I needed more. I needed to find her fatal flaw, and in that moment, I did. I saw it in her eyes. That flicker of uncertainty. The way she avoided looking at the product specs she knew I had access to. The way she tried to control the narrative, but didn't understand the software she was talking about. The trap had been set, but I wasn't the one in danger. I'd been publicly humiliated. But Sarah? She was about to become my biggest mistake. And now, all I had to do was wait. I'd watched Sarah closely in the days leading up to the board meeting. She was on edge, constantly pacing around the office, fingers tapping against her phone as if every text might contain some magical solution to the mess she'd made. But deep down, I knew what she didn't. The game was already over for her. The articles were circulating now, quietly, almost unnoticed at first. But then, like a snowball rolling down a hill, it picked up speed. The press, the blogs, even some industry insiders were beginning to ask the questions Sarah never wanted answered. There was chatter about the marketing-driven failures, whispers about the risks being pushed on the engineering team to meet an unrealistic deadline, and subtle mentions of an internal power struggle. All of it was pointing directly at Sarah. The board was panicking. The execs were in damage control mode, trying to spin the crisis as a technical error. But they couldn't ignore the growing sense that they were being led into a disaster by someone who didn't understand the product. Sarah tried to fight back. Oh, she did. In one desperate maneuver, she organized a recovery task force, which was essentially a public relations stunt designed to make it look like she was in control. She invited several members of the board to a closed-door meeting, where she claimed to have a solution to the product's instability. She promised a quick fix to restore faith in the project. But the more she talked, the more it became clear that she was flailing, her answers vague, her demeanor defensive. I knew something was about to crack. It was just a matter of time. I watched the clock tick down to the Friday meeting, the one that would decide the fate of the product and Sarah. The board had been stewing for days, uncertainty eating at them. And now, all their doubts were rising to the surface. I could feel it in every whisper, every sidelong glance from the executives as they passed by my desk. The night before the meeting, I received a call. It was a low, hushed voice on the other end. The kind of voice that's been trained to stay under the radar. "I've got something for you," the voice said. I smiled. This was it. The final piece of the puzzle. It was a recording. The CEO, late one night, discussing the product launch with Sarah. He was furious, demanding answers, questioning whether she even understood the technical side of the project. The conversation was heated, the CEO making it clear that if this product failed, she would be the one responsible. She had no idea I had access to this, and I wasn't going to use it publicly, not yet. I didn't need the board to hear the CEO's frustration. I needed Sarah to hear it. I made one final adjustment. I sent the recording to Sarah's inbox, under the guise of an anonymous tip, just hours before the meeting. I wanted her to feel the walls closing in, to be forced to confront the reality of her failure. The trap had been set. By the time Sarah entered the boardroom the next morning, she was already losing. She didn't know it, but she was. The meeting began with all the usual corporate pleasantries, everyone trying to stay on script, but it didn't take long for the tension to seep in. The board was already primed, their faces tight, their body language more defensive than usual. The first few minutes felt like a calm before a storm. And then, Sarah opened her mouth. "We're going to launch the product as planned," she said confidently, holding her notes up like a shield. "I've spoken with the engineering team, and we're addressing the issues as we speak. The market's ready for this, and we can't afford another delay. I've already made the necessary adjustments to ensure this product will succeed." The arrogance in her voice, the way she dismissed everything that had happened in the last 2 weeks, that's when I knew she was finished. She had no idea what was coming. I leaned back in my seat, arms crossed, watching her squirm. The first cracks were already starting to show. The CEO's voice from the night before had rattled her. I could see the way she kept checking her phone, the way her hand trembled slightly when she spoke. And then, the first question came from one of the board members. "Sarah, we've been hearing concerns about the integrity of the product. Specifically, the timeline and the changes that were made to the deployment schedule. Can you clarify how we got to this point?" Sarah froze, her face stiffened, her eyes darting around the room. She wasn't prepared for this. That's a misunderstanding," she stammered, but the damage had already been done. The board members were already looking at each other, exchanging silent glances. I knew the next step would be crucial. So, I decided to tip the scale. I stood up, slowly, deliberately, walking to the front of the room. I wasn't going to shout or make a grand gesture. No. This was a calculated move. I turned to the board. I think the problem here is one of understanding. While Sarah and the marketing team were pushing to get this product out as quickly as possible, some of us in the engineering department were raising concerns about the timeline. We asked for more time to address critical bugs, and those requests were ignored. I paused, letting the silence hang in the room for a moment. Perhaps it would be helpful for the board to see the actual timeline of the product development, the decisions that were made, and who made them. I didn't need to say more. I'd already emailed the board, the logs, the emails, and the internal communications proving that Sarah's team was directly responsible for the rushed timeline. I had evidence that her insistence on meeting the launch deadline was the reason for the instability in the product. I had everything. Sarah's face went pale. She tried to salvage it, but the damage was done. The room had already turned. The board was turning away from her, the cracks in her narrative widening. And then, I hit her with the final blow, the CEO's recording. I slid the phone onto the table, a quiet, almost casual move. The CEO's voice played through the speakers. If this product fails, Sarah, you'll be the one responsible. We can't keep pushing these launches if they're not ready. You've got to make sure it's done right, or you're done. There was no mistaking the tone in his voice. Sarah's face went white, her breathing shallow. The room went deathly quiet. The silence in the boardroom was suffocating, thick with the weight of what had just transpired. The CEO's voice, the very man who had been her ally, now hung in the air like a poison gas, slowly suffocating Sarah's last shred of hope. She tried to recover, of course. The panic on her face was clear now, like a mask slipping, revealing her true vulnerability. This is a misunderstanding, she stammered, looking desperately at the board members. I can explain. But the board wasn't listening anymore. They were done with her. I could see it in their eyes. The skepticism, the doubt, the realization that Sarah had put not just the product, but the company's future on the line. All the damage she had caused by pushing the launch forward, without regard for the integrity of the product, was now painfully visible. The first domino had fallen. Sarah, said the chairman of the board, his voice like gravel. I think it's clear we need a full investigation into this. We can't afford to ignore what's been revealed here. I leaned against the wall, arms folded, watching the disintegration unfold in real time. Sarah was a master manipulator. But like all the best manipulators, she'd built her empire on half-truths and spin, and now the truth was coming for her. The board had already begun their murmurs, the ripple of their collective judgment evident in every side-eye and whispered conversation. The CEO, usually a calm figure, was visibly irritated, standing at the back, arms crossed, staring at the table. You're saying the timeline was rushed because of marketing pressure? The CFO asked, cutting in, a slight sneer on his face. That's a serious accusation, Sarah. We need to know exactly how this happened and who authorized these decisions, and we need it in detail. She sputtered for a moment, trying to maintain composure. I didn't make those decisions alone. There were many people involved. We were trying to move fast, but let's be clear, I interrupted, my voice low but carrying a weight that made the room go still. You weren't trying to move fast. You were trying to launch a product without it being ready, to save face and avoid missing deadlines. Now, we're all here dealing with the consequences. I looked around at the board, meeting their eyes. I'd be happy to walk you through how this all unfolded if you'd like. Sarah's eyes shot daggers at me, but she knew better than to speak now. She was cornered. The final nail in the coffin came from an unexpected place, the legal department. One of the senior lawyers, who had been quietly observing the entire meeting, stood up. It's my job to ensure we're not opening ourselves up to liability. And based on the evidence presented here today, I'm afraid we may have already crossed that line. He looked at Sarah with a cold, calculating gaze. If the product is launched with the current issues, we risk violating multiple consumer protection laws. I suggest we halt everything and begin a thorough internal review. Sarah's face twisted in horror, as the weight of the legal ramifications hit her full force. She hadn't just jeopardized the product's success. She'd now placed the company on the verge of a potential legal nightmare. The board was no longer protecting her. Their faces were grim, some already reaching for their phones to make calls to legal teams, others scribbling notes in the margins of their agendas. Her downfall was complete, but Sarah still didn't give up. She made one last desperate attempt to salvage something, anything. "Wait, please," she said, her voice cracking. "I've worked too hard for this company. I've done everything I could to get us here. I don't deserve this." The words were hollow, coming from someone who had spent the past week spinning webs of lies. She wasn't pleading for redemption. She was begging for survival. And the board? They were done with her. The chairman's voice cut through the air like a final judgment. "Sarah, we're going to need you to step down. Immediately. We can't risk any more damage to the company." It was as though the world slowed down for a moment. A brief, surreal pause where Sarah's fate hung in the balance. And then, just as quickly, the hammer came down. I'm sorry?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Disbelieving. "You're fired," he said simply, almost indifferently. The words hit her like a tidal wave. She froze, her entire body going rigid. And then, in a last-ditch attempt at control, she did something no one expected. She lashed out. "You think you've won?" she snapped, pointing a trembling finger at me. "This isn't over. You think the board cares about some petty accusations? You think you've saved this company? You're wrong. I will take this to the media. I will expose you all for this. You'll see." But no one cared anymore. The board had already made their decision. Sarah Davis was done. The next day, the press release hit. The company announced Sarah's resignation, though we all knew it was anything but voluntary, and stated that an internal investigation would be launched into the product's instability. The media outlets picked up the story instantly, spinning it as a classic case of corporate mismanagement, with Sarah being portrayed as the overambitious, reckless director who had jeopardized the company's future. And as the press spun their narrative, I sat back and watched, letting the satisfaction of the moment settle in. The fall had been swift, but it had been coming for a long time. Sarah had gambled everything for a quick win, and now she had lost it all. The last piece of her empire, the fragile facade she had built around her success, crumbled, leaving nothing but the wreckage of her own mistakes. But even as Sarah's public humiliation became the talk of the industry, I knew that the final blow was still to come. There was one more thing I had to do: the legal fallout.